All right. I am very excited for this next session. Just by show of hands, how many of you know of or have been to Transform? Yeah, a majority of the room. Samara is the co-founder and GM of Transform, which, if you don't know it, is an incredible conference that happens every March in Las Vegas, a giant and immersive and really incredible experience to dive deeper into the future of work. And this is a session curated by Samara and her team at Transform. With her to talk about connection in our hybrid world, we have Rebecca Bex and Donald Knight. Bex is the CHRO at 10x Genomics, and DK is the head of people and culture at Warner Brothers Discovery. So please join me in welcoming these three on stage.
Hello. Hello, hello. Well, first, Robin, if you're still here, I just want to congratulate you and the team for an absolutely amazing event. I haven't had the pleasure to be here both days, but it's so special, and I can see the delight and the inspiration in everyone's faces and in the conversations that are taking place. So congrats to you and the team. Well, it's so exciting to be at someone else's conference, which is so less stressful. And I actually get to spend time with the people that I love in the community and get to meet many others in the community. So when Robin asked if we wanted to be involved, I was like, absolutely yes, please. And then I got to think about, what conversation do we want to have and what fun people can I spend time with? So I couldn't pick two better people. And Rima is with us in spirit. She had something come up from a family perspective, so she couldn't be here. But we're going to, I think, just dive in instead of spending more time on intros. So we're going to talk about connection in a hybrid world today. So I thought it would be best if we start by level setting on what connection means to each of us. So Bex, maybe you want to start?
Yeah. Okay. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for spending some time with us this afternoon. I'm really pleased to ask that question because I talk a lot about connection. And when you said, we should talk about what it is, I thought, oh, crikey, what is it? and what does it mean to me? So I think for me, connection is, the first thing that came to my mind was it's not about everybody being really good friends, but it is about having deep trust with one another and great respect for one another, and operating in a way that when you do that, what that elicits is a psychological safety. So I feel safe enough to disagree with you. I feel safe enough to give you feedback. And the third thing that for me connection is this curiosity. I care about you and I'm interested to know. It doesn't mean to say I know everything about you. It doesn't mean to say that, we hang out every minute, but I'm curious about you. And I was talking to someone who was an ex professional sportsman. And he said, one of the things I loved about being a pro sportsman is that everybody did their job. And I was, tell me more about that. And he said, on the pitch, I knew that if they did their job and I did my job, and we just had a connection. And he was like, I knew, I couldn't see them necessarily, but I know they'd be where I needed them to be. And that to me was about, that's what connection is.
Can I just say ditto _ retweet and not answer the question? No, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'm inclined to agree with Bex. I think connection for me is it's safe, meaningful moments that allow you to relate to another human being. And when done properly or kindly, I think we crave them. I'll give you an example. So I have the luxury of having one of my former colleagues in the crowd, and Kevin Dell right here. He didn't even know I was going to bring him up, right? This is amazing because I didn't know he was going to be here. So, but he worked with me at my last organization, and the connection that we established very early on in my tenure there allowed us to do some amazing things. But we sought those things out, right? The curiosity that you're speaking of. And I think that's because there was safety there. I think when you have that connection with someone else, it allows you to be able to take on some of the hard challenges of business, regardless of where you may live or reside. I think the other thing that I'd be remiss, Samara, if I don't point out is I've also seen when you've had a lack of connection with other individuals and you're wondering like, what is it? Like they weren't mean to me, they weren't unkind to me, but what is it? And I think it's because you haven't had the meaningful moments that allowed you to say, I'm safe with that human being. And therefore the curiosity that you normally seek out, you don't do it with that individual. So yeah.
So I think the topic of this conversation is connection in a hybrid world. And I think a lot of people talk about right now hybrid workforces and, how do you create the right culture? How do you facilitate an environment where connections can happen? And so the three of us actually have very different organizational dynamics. So I have worked remotely in fully remote teams since 2014. So no office. My entire team is now all over the world since I have someone in Melbourne as well. And we don't, we actually don't get together quarterly, although we have a very intense experience right at the conference kind of every spring. So my situation is very different. And so I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about what each of you are experiencing within your organizations and how do you think about connection in the context of that org structure. And maybe Donald, you could talk about both your current employer and your last employer, since I think those are kind of two contrasting situations. So maybe you want to start?
Yeah. First of all, you're a pioneer in remote culture, right? Like to do so prior to the pandemic was almost an anomaly. I mean, I remember back then when people were talking about telework and it seemed like a novelty that would never happen. And so kudos to you for helping like pioneer that and crossing that chasm early. At my current organization, Warner Brothers Discovery, we have a hybrid environment, right? So we have campuses all over the world. Here in this particular city, we have Bleacher Report. So if you see any of the House of Highlights stuff, the GM Bennett who runs that organization is actually based here. And it works for us, right? Like we realize the importance, if you're in the storytelling business, there is a magical moment that happens with in-person collaboration that is very difficult to duplicate on Teams, Zoom, Slack, web, who else? Google Meets. It's very hard to duplicate that level of creativity. Yeah, FaceTime, there you go. So we have a hybrid environment. I think the other thing I would be remiss if I don't point out is when we're in person though, we're very mindful of what activities are happening while we're there. So this is one of the very first companies that I've ever been at where like the grace to be able to say I'm not attending that meeting because there's nothing meaningful that I'm going to contribute is very big, because we don't want creatives to be inside of rooms that they're not able to unlock the value that they're going to bring. And oh, by the way, we believe 100% of our employees are creative. So regardless of what moments you're contributing to at Warner Brothers Discovery, I think if I juxtapose that against my last organization, which is a software tech company called Greenhouse Software, I know some of you are customers. I talked to Cassandra earlier. The beauty there was like, in many ways, and Kevin's here so he can fact check me on this, I helped take the company fully distributed. So we had offices where people could meet together and we took the company fully distributed. And there was a host of reasons why, but one of the ways that we're able to maintain that connection is really twofold. The first one is prioritizing asynchronous work. What we found is like meeting fatigue is real when you go to remote cultures. And so how do you foster an environment where, we can collaborate from different places and still be able to update docs and things of that nature? I think the second one though is we built a people experience team because we recognize human interaction is still one of the greatest ways to accelerate connection. And so having that team foster events up and across our footprint allowed for them to be able to have the connection that we thought was needed for our culture to be sustained.
So we are a biotech company that's based here in the East Bay. and we've got 1,300 employees, offices in various places over the world. We are very much an in-office organization, and that's largely because a lot of our workforce are scientists, and you can't do lab work from home. And so to kind of even the playing fields, we've said we're an in-office organization. We've always had some fully remote employees. So we've got field-based employees that have always been, sales people and so on. And so I would say, of that 1,300, maybe 400 are fully remote employees. And the leadership team and I believe that collaborating in person is more effective when we are all together, especially when we're doing things like experiments that we need to run and then check, is this working, and go back and forth. So I think for me, like the hybrid piece, it really depends on what the purpose of your company.
We will take audience questions. So if anyone does have a question, I'll keep an eye out. So please just raise your hand, and we're happy to take those throughout. So maybe just kind of double clicking on the in-office versus office. Bex and Rima and I originally were having a conversation, kind of a debate about, right, Amazon, right, lots of CEOs coming out with, everyone needs to come back to the office. That's the only way the organization is going to be productive. Amazon has now said everyone has to come back into the office 5 days in 2025. Right, there's some conversation that some CHROs are now kind of on the same page with CEOs in terms of everyone should come back to the office. So I wanted to put Donald and Bex on the spot to see kind of what is their philosophy, right? What's your position, right? Do you agree with kind of this movement from a CEO perspective? What's your reaction?
I'm going to say ladies first.
Okay. Look, I think many CEOs have got productivity paranoia. And I think there is a perception that people are more productive when they're in the office. My personal view is like maybe sometimes, maybe not, right? Again, I think it depends on what those people are doing. If you've got a bunch of creatives that are dragged into meeting after meeting, that's not the best place. There are people in my own team that are much more productive when they're at home designing, events that are going to be incredible for our employees. So, I think we need to help educate CEOs to understand, like, what are we trying to get and what problem are we really solving for? For me, flexibility is absolutely key, right? There is no silver bullet. There is no right way to do this. We are talking about a whole series of complex systems. We are talking about people that are complex. We are talking about jobs that are complex and different. We are talking about organizations that are complex and different. And so to really get that, so that 3 days in the office is right for everybody, I think is really difficult. So making sure that you're connected to your employees and your teams, and you've got managers that understand Bex needs to leave on a Tuesday at 4:00 because she coaches kids soccer or whatever it is really, really important.
Yeah, you said flexibility, which resonates with me. If the audience would humor me for a second, do me a favor and just raise your hand. Raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand. Okay. Leave your hand up if you raised your hand with your non-dominant hand. Leave your hand up if you raised your hand with your non-dominant hand. We're seeing most of the hands go down right now, right? So, this gentleman, why did you leave your hand up? Why did you raise your hand with your non-dominant hand?
My dominant hand was resting and I was a little lazy.
I love that. All right. A little transparency right there, right? The reason I do that exercise, I did that exercise with our CEO. Most people raise their hand with their dominant hand based on experience. That's the hand that you use the most. Even in your justification for not using your dominant hand, it was because, look, I'm giving this one a rest now, right? So the reason I say that is because the CEOs that are requiring people to go back to the office, that's where they've seen success. And so there's some level of grace that I have for the CEO. I know it's probably unpopular to say, but I have grace for the CEOs because they have only seen success one way, which is in-office culture, in-office collaboration, in-office productivity. And for us to tell those individuals now that they're most CEOs, I think the average age right now is 58. Someone can fact check me on ChatGPT, but I did ask yesterday, so it might have went up. it's hard to get someone at 58 to then change all of this experience that they've had. So I have grace for the CEOs. At the same time, I have grace for the employees. What we've seen during the pandemic is that affording more flexibility inside of the workplace is actually a good thing for a human experience. And what are we deriving when we show up to these offices? We don't get to just park being a parent, being a partner at the door. Like, you still show up with that other part of you. And so I think what has to be demonstrated is a level of grace. My hope is that CEOs will be more open to giving grace to their employees, which will hopefully lead to greater flexibility, and that employees will give more grace to their CEO.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think that one of the gifts of the pandemic was that it opened up all of our lives. Suddenly we saw each other as real people. And, you know, your kids are running in, or the dog's barking, or, you know, whatever it is, or we're looking around each other's homes and like, oh, I like your wallpaper, or whatever it is, you know. And that we need to make sure that we don't lose. Like, we need to make sure that we continue to humanize and see each other really as people. I'm curious for you, Samara, though. You're a CEO. Like, what is your perspective of the relationship between productivity and connection?
That's such a good question. I mean, I think what Donald said is really interesting, which is, right, I have been working remote fully with a team since 2014. Some of that time I spent consulting, but I started working on Transform back in 2017. It's like, oh my God. But I mean, I think some of it is, you know, I saw the success of, right, working with a fully distributed team. And that was even before we did any video calls. I mean, I joke about FaceTime, but I remember when I started working on the conference and programming, and I was collaborating with one of my co-founders on the program, we used to literally sit on the phone for like 3 to 4 hours and work on the agenda. And it would be like, you could tell when he got distracted, and I'd be like, hey, I know you're not paying attention anymore. Like, hello. But, you know, I saw the success in doing that. But, you know, connection and productivity. I do think creating opportunities and moments to establish trust is really important to making it work. And so, right, whether that's, you know, getting together at some point in person, right, having moments. It could be as small as like a phone call, right, or a talk and walk. But I think having those moments to establish connection, right, in those environments, like with the people on my team, that I had that kind of deeper connection. I always knew, like, we were a superpower team, right? Like, our strengths, like, we knew each other's strengths. We could kind of read each other's minds. Like, we'd know where we'd ebb and flow to complement each other. And so, right, I think that enabled us to be even more productive and achieve even more because of that. But I'd be curious to hear both of your answers to that question too.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are more productive when they're connected. I don't think that I don't think you need, I think within a hybrid environment, as long as you are creating those moments to connect and to be together at some point face to face, then I think you can have the connection. But I think true collaboration is really, really difficult, if not impossible, without deep connection.
Yeah, I would echo that. I feel like, not to sound squishy, but I feel like I'm unproductive in environments where I'm unfulfilled. And I think a large part of the places that I've worked where I've felt a heightened sense of fulfillment, a lot of that has been where I've had meaningful connection. And doing that allowed me the opportunity to be like super productive and reach, you know, a gear in business that I didn't even know I personally had until you find yourselves in those environments. And the way I kind of talk about them is, like, if you think about like your favorite teacher growing up, that person gave you so much oxygen and you felt like you could take on the world. They might have been very challenging and like wanted the best for you, but like it was so much oxygen in that environment. You felt safety. And so I felt like you could be more productive in that. And my hope is that whether you're the CEO like Samara or you're the CHRO like Bex, that you're hopefully fostering those types of environments, regardless if they're hybrid or not, because I think that's where people will be fulfilled and that's where you'll see heightened sense of productivity.
I think back, now I'm going to date myself, but I started my career at AOL when AOL was the internet before Google and everyone else, Meta, existed. And at that time, right, there was no such thing as hybrid work, but there were people who worked in headquarters and there were people who worked in satellite offices. And I started my career working in a satellite office, which in many ways I feel like is similar, right? Like the dynamics of being kind of in headquarters, right, or in office versus a satellite office or remote, I think are similar. And I just remember, right, I always looked, I'm obviously biased, I run an in-person event business, but FaceTime is so important, right? Like the relationships that you can build with someone over a meal. I went to the conversation earlier about like the value of food in creating connection and culture, but the conversations and the moments that you create with someone in person just cannot, I really believe they can't be replicated virtually. I mean, I think you can establish very deep connections with people virtually, but there is truly something special for like the moments that you make, right? Listening to music, going to going out dancing, staying up all night in Vegas, right? Having a coffee, going on a walk with someone, right? Those moments are memorable and powerful in a way that you just can't recreate virtually. And so, when I was at AOL and I was in a satellite office, like whenever I went to headquarters in Virginia, like essentially I went to be social. Like I went to connect with people and kind of build relationships so that then when I emailed them and I needed them to do something, right? Like I knew they were going to kind of think, and raise my email to the top. Like they may be more inclined to help me because we actually had a deeper connection in a relationship. So FaceTime, right? Memorable moments, kind of experiences together in person, I think are so important. Let's pivot a little bit. Feel free to raise your hand if you have questions. Oh, okay.
Hi. I'm curious, probably for you, Donald, or anybody else who's had experience at a startup, when you're in that, everyone has 3 extra jobs, everyone's 3 weeks behind, the CEO's terrified about the next deadline. How do you make time for those connections that end up fueling that workforce? And to that, how do you advocate for that at the leadership level with all of the competing priorities?
That is such a great question, and one that is very difficult to solve for startups, right? To your point, like you're lucky if you only wear 3 hats, right? For those that have worked at tech companies. I would say there's 2 things that I have seen work during my experience. I'm sure that there's way more opportunities and folks that have greater solutions. The 2 things that I would say though is, the first one is, when you say make time for it, I think it's a priority just like the work. Like the work becomes easier when you have meaningful connection. And there's companies out there that will help you like create that. One of the ways that we did that was really 2 ways. One of those companies are here, the other company is not, but I'll give a shout out to both of them. The first one is this company called Relating Between the Lines. If you work at a tech company and you haven't heard about Relating Between the Lines, it's great. Their CEO is actually sitting in the 4th row. So she can raise her hand. We actually leverage Relating Between the Lines at Greenhouse. And the idea there was like, how do you foster connection with people that live in 36 states and 4 different countries? That's hard. And none of us got to control where we landed on the planet. And so trying to figure out, how do I create a meaningful connection with Bex? I know that she's, her name is Rebecca, but if she's going by Bex, there's probably some connection to London, and I'm living in Atlanta. How do I establish that relationship? As opposed to creating a relationship with Tamara, who lives out here in Oakland. Like, how do I do that? So having a company help facilitate that and making an investment on how you prioritize connection in meaningful ways, that's helpful. And there's small things that you can do. They actually have like a little phenomenal card they gave out earlier. If you don't have that card, go talk to them. They'll give you one. But even like in the way that you message to people on a virtual environment, there's ways to foster greater connection as opposed to make it dissipate. I think the second thing though, that is super helpful is when you're looking at your company's growth strategy, they have to go connect with customers anyway. So one of the things that I noticed is the folks that had the best numbers on our sales team and the best numbers on our CS team, they also had the best numbers inside of the company. They were the people that are the most popular in the company because they had great connection, of which Kevin is one of them. Like, he knows everybody. So earlier, before this session, I FaceTimed my old team with him and was telling them that I was spending quality time with him. And they instantly got jealous. They were like, how? You don't even work at Greenhouse anymore. I'm like, yeah, but I have a real connection with Kevin. So na, right? So I say that to say this, like, the ROI you're gonna get in prioritizing the connection is tenfold. Because if they're better humans with one another and have meaningful connections, you better believe they're gonna be better humans with the folks that you're trying to sell into. So I think you absolutely have to make it a priority.
I totally agree. And, I think we have a challenge right now with people prioritizing autonomy over connections. And, and it feels great in the moment because, I get to spend more time with my kids, or I get to exercise whenever I want, or I don't have to have a commute because I'm refusing to go back to the office, or I don't want to go back to the office. But what I'm not optimizing for is connections. And I feel like that is going to catch us all up. One, because of, like you said, in terms of just being more successful. I feel like if you are more connected in the organization, it's easier to get things done. But also just because of our mental health. Like, we are biologically hardwired to want to look each other in the eye, to want to connect with each other. And autonomy is awesome. It's really important. And I love having breakfast with my children every morning. And I love going for a run when I want to. But I also love being with people. And I think that we have to get into all of our workforces and all of our minds that connecting is part of the work.
This is a great chat, so thank you so much for this. But I've been thinking so much about, like, a lot of us in the room probably have at some point worked in an office and then pivoted, whether it was COVID or not, to some sort of remote or hybrid situation, right? What about the younger generation that's coming up now? We talked a little bit about it yesterday, right? They need different things for well-being. These workers who have never been in an office environment, how do we help mentor them in the ways that we might have learned and mentor, or maybe there are different ways to mentor them so they can grow their careers? Because, they're not necessarily sitting at home having breakfast with their kids, like, I appreciate that too, and, driving these kids to school, whatever. But, like, they're sitting in a curtain with 4 roommates trying to build a career on Zoom. So I'm just wondering if anyone has had any experience with this or how to solve this. I think it's a big problem.
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. I have 2 children, one of which is a 13-year-old who legally turns 14 in December, but he thinks he's 21. So it's a whole, I have that generation in my house. One of the things I will quote him, his name is Dalen. And, one of the things he taught me was, like, not framing it generation versus generation. Like, there's not a right or wrong way to do business. There is a way. There's multiple ways, though. And so the default that they have on how they've built connection, my son's connections with people virtually is insane. Like, he plays games with them, friends that we haven't lived in Virginia in over 5 years, and he's still talking to that friend every day when they go play games or they're in certain chat rooms like Discord together. And so I think it's imperative as leaders at organizations that we don't put one generation versus the other and saying this is the right way to successfully navigate business and this is the wrong way. To your point, though, if we do that, then we demonstrate a certain level of care and safety, which now they're open to receive, right? So I use that same thing with my son. He has his favorite steakhouse that we go to in the greater Atlanta area, and he's like, "Hey, why do you know everybody's name?" I was like, "Oh, dude, like, I had to do that to, like, be successful in business." So I made sure I was kind to the person at the gate. I was also kind to my boss. I was kind to my peers. And you got to be kind up, across, and down. So he tells his friends, yeah, my dad said you got to be kind up, across, and down. Because they're wondering, like, Dalen, how did you get invited to the party? And I didn't get invited to, insert any little kid's name. And so I'm using that as an opportunity. Once I demonstrate that care and safety, now he's open to receive. So I've tried to try this at work, and it's worked. Like, with our younger talent, letting them know, like, hey, there is a value in meeting Bex at the People and Culture social hour. Like, you're going to learn things. You're going to find out she's a runner. I didn't know that before today. We did a prep call. I didn't know that. So we could have got a run in today. But, like, those types of things, letting them know that you get to learn different levels of humans And at Warner Brothers, what I've tried to demonstrate is they understand the value of the creative process, right? Because you all go out and see our movies, which I thoroughly appreciate. But we talk about character depth. And if you're talking to our writers, the depth of the character, why is this person in this movie, why do you care more about that person than another character in the movie? Why do you have that level of connection? Because the diversity around the table and the people curating that character, they're going to different levels of depth that you can't do if you're just inside of a chat room. And so I tell my son, like, why do you like that character? Like, I'm personally a Batman guy. My last name is Knight. My AOL Instant Messenger name was The Dark Knight since I was like 12, right? Now they don't even have AOL Instant Messenger. So Samara, bring that back, please. It did. But like knowing that, why did I connect with that character as opposed to Robin or as opposed to anybody else? And so I think that level of depth, that's what we have to do as leaders. Like if you're going to harness and shepherd that human experience while people are under your care at work, you got to be willing to get to a certain level of depth with them and being able to drive that level of connection. So I'm very passionate about this because I think a lot of leaders right now are doing it the wrong way. And I think it's harming people when they show up to certain work environments.
Yeah, and I totally agree on I feel that we have to help younger generations and all generations understand the importance of connection. But I also feel that one of the gifts different generations are giving each other is, changing the way that we work and saying, hey, look, there is a different way to do this. And I don't think that that's just young generations. I think that's all people. I can remember looking at my parents and thinking, I wanted, you work for the same company for your entire career. Like, that's boring. I don't want to do that. I want to live in lots of different countries. I want to do this. And it wasn't that I didn't want to work, right? It's just I didn't want to work that way. And I think that that's what different generations always tell the generation before them and have done for many, many years. And so I think that we need to learn from them and meet them where they're at. But I also think, helping a digital generation really understand that, hey, look, getting together in person is fundamentally important. And I'm super curious as to whether or not people want to do that. I grew up, but where I made most of my friends is at work. And I think that there are maybe generational differences where people are like, you know what, I just want to clock in and clock out. But I think it will have a detrimental impact on their mental health eventually.
Okay, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was like thinking meet people where they're at, literally at the same time you said that. So I agree with everything that I think both of you said. I know you had a question earlier you were going to ask actually about the friends at work.
Yeah, so because I like value connection so much, I'm curious to hear from you two. Like when you think about the folks that you've had meaningful connection with in your past, what did that look like? Because I think one of the tangible takeaways people can figure out is or hear from you all is, how do you establish that connection? And then how do you cultivate that? So what were the connections you might have had in your past that were meaningful enough? And then what were the elements of that relationship?
So many of my friends, even today, 25 years later, are from AOL. So my time at AOL, I think, was very transformative and informative and inspirational for my life today. I actually just got back from a safari to Kenya with someone I worked with at AOL and have known for 25 years. And it's amazing. I mean, I think that was a very unique experience. I mean, certainly it had a certain level of intensity, right? It had, equal parts, very much play hard and work hard. And kind of the intensity of what we were building together then and kind of the time we were at with the evolution of the internet and then kind of the explosion of AOL after the Time Warner acquisition. I mean, all of those experiences really kind of built deep connections with people who I probably never would have been friends with otherwise, but we were in the trenches together. The level of respect that we built for each other. A lot of my friends, I remember we were in different departments and it would be 9:00 at night and we'd be leaving the office and we'd see each other in the garage and it'd be like, have you eaten dinner? No. Oh, okay, let's go eat together. And so, right, so much of my social existence also became about food, right? Eating, drinking, having coffee, spending time together, right? Those moments and that time together at AOL right? Today, my closest friends still are all people who I worked with there.
Yeah, it's interesting as you say that question. I think for me, I totally agree with the the intensity and the like doing something really incredible together. I think it's also about having fun, and for me that's really important because that's one of my values. And I like having fun in everything that I do, and when I have fun with people, I feel more connected. I also, if I'm thinking back to kind of the people I still feel most connected to, there's a kindness there. Like it was people that were kind to me. And, and even small things like, how are you doing, or thoughtful about, a gift on my birthday or something like that, but just moments of kindness.
That's so powerful. There was a presentation I was giving at my last organization. It was like week 2, and I hadn't double checked one of the slides. And there was a very kind human on my team that went through and said, "Hey, Donald, you need to refresh your page." I'm like, no, I'm already presenting. I'm ready to go. Because, if you've ever presented on Zoom, once you're presenting, that's the version that's being presented, even if something has been tweaked. So I listened to them. I went ahead and refreshed it anyway. And then afterwards, I had to thank her because I was like, oh my goodness, like I saw you change that slide. I didn't know what was wrong with it. And she was like, oh, the link didn't work. The video wasn't going to play for you, da, 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 da. And so those moments of kindness, I think, are very, very important in business, despite what some humans may tell you. I also believe in like universal languages. So universal languages, what do I mean by that? Samara talked about one of them, which is food. Food is a universal language. Music is a universal language. Dance is a universal language. I'm missing 2. Travel is a universal language. And then the last one is artful expression. Artful expression could be sculpture, it could be painting, it can be a movie, but artful expressions. We looked at some of our candidates surveys at my last organization, and you could figure out which humans were going to be able to connect with their leader better based on how many times they spent time doing those universal languages. And I think about this now, like Kevin, you can like fact check me. The very first time I met you in San Francisco, you and I had food. Yeah. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, how do you get someone who you don't work with anymore to still show up and support you if you're speaking? Might want to spend some time eating ice cream with that person. So we'll have to get ice cream later on. We'll figure it out.
Any other? Yep.
Those of you who met this weekend, I'm a new mom. I actually go back to work tomorrow, and it has completely changed the way that I think about hybrid work and remote work. And so we've talked a lot about the benefits of in-person collaboration, whether that's daily or occasionally. And I'm thinking a lot about the choices that people make to opt in or opt out of those events, whether it's actually an optional event that they can choose to attend or not, or even opting out of the workforce, opting out of the high-level roles that have them missing breakfast with your kids, missing soccer practice, the late nights in the garage where you opt for dinner with your coworkers. So how do you acknowledge and sort of respect the choices that people are making, even when they're opting in and they're present, but they're missing something else, or the converse, like with their opting out and still wanting to be part of the community?
I mean, I think it goes back to meeting people where they're at, right? When my kids were really little, it was kind of mid-pandemic, and I can remember outside of my office, the room that the kids would normally be playing in had a glass door, and then you'd have to pass that to get to the bathroom. And my kid was I don't know, probably 10, 12 months old, and he would cry endlessly if he saw me. So there was one day where I really needed the flu, and I can remember like commando crawling on the floor to get to the bathroom in between back-to-back Zoom calls. I was like, I can't work from home. This is just too hard, right? Whereas there were other people in my baby group that were like, this is awesome. I love being with the baby. And so I think meeting people where they're at and giving people that choice and giving people enough support, connecting with other new mothers, like what's working for you, what are your tips? Certainly for me, that was really helpful. And I always assume somebody's got a better place to be than here, right? Like nobody has to really be there. I mean, yes, I'm sure many of us work because we, need to pay our rent and things like that, but we could all get other jobs somewhere else. And so I try and look at people and say, what is it that makes you want to be here? Both on a meta level and on an individual level.
The other thing I would add is I think we talked a lot about the big moments, right? So in-person connections, but I think building connection is also about the very little moments. And so, right, trying to, ensure, right, connecting with someone if they mention that, their child was sick or they're talking about coming back to the office, like really asking them and taking the space to say, how are you really doing? Today's your first day back. How is that going, right? How can I support you? And so I think that's what I try to remember as I've built a virtual team. We don't always get together in person. In fact, most of the year we're not together in person. But how do I ensure, at least with my team, that I take those little moments, right, to make a difference for them, or kind of listen to them vent, or meet them where they're at. And so I think the thing about building connection is it's about the big and the little moments. And maybe it might be more about the repetitiveness of those little moments, right, versus just one big moment. I don't know if you have.
First of all, I want to say I have empathy for you as a parent that's going to be returning to the workforce. My daughter is 6 months, so the jitters that they don't tell you about going back to work, or leaving your baby and figuring out what that feels like. I have a lot of empathy for you, and I appreciate you asking the question publicly. My head of DE&I at Greenhouse had a baby while I was there, and one of the things she talked about was the safety of being able to have a baby in the first place, like the safety of knowing that I have a job I can return to and I have support at the workplace. One of the things we did, and I would encourage you, if assume your leader's a decent human, if not a phenomenal human, but vocalizing what that support looks like for you, I think is imperative. When I was younger, I've been a leader for a long time, but when I was younger, I started meetings in the workday at 8 a.m. Little did I know that is not conducive for parents. So I've shifted my own meeting cadence of when am I willing to start meetings and not start meetings, or if I'm going to force camera on culture in Zoom, or allow people the flexibility to have the camera off so they don't have to do the bear crawl to the baby. But having someone vocalize that support shed light on me on what I could do differently to be supportive. And so I would encourage you, in vocalizing that with your leader, they may be able to show up for you better if you're able to share that, and being able to say hey, no, I won't be able to do the after social hours, but I can do the midday social hours. Just vocalizing that should allow some level of environment for them to know how they can support you. And if they're not willing to support you, there's tons of companies out here that are willing to support you. So reach out and we'll figure out how we can get you to one of those environments as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I work with a company that plans offsites for other companies. My clients are people that are people leaders such as yourselves, that they understand the importance of the connecting pieces to productivity. They always have a CFO or a VP of finance that says, oh, we can do that for $500 per person total, right? For a 4-night retreat in the Galapagos Islands, right? The budgets that we receive are minimal. So what tools have you seen to get financial leaders or CEOs to be willing and excited to invest in people and connectivity?
I think there has to be a bit of a proof of concept, right? It took me 18 months to convince my boss that we needed to take his team off site, and this is someone who is incredibly smart, has a PhD in maths from Harvard, is a scientist, and he said, what's going to be different after it? And I was like, I knew you were going to ask me that. And it's look, this is really uncomfortable for me to say, but we will feel different. And he was like, what? And he's like, how do we measure that? I was like, oh God. I'm like, we don't. But I guarantee, we will feel different. I think the conversations that we have will be different. Trust me. And it's like, okay, I trust you. So we go off site and I make it as efficient as possible. It's noon to noon, 24 hours. I was like, give me 24 hours and I'll show you, all right? We go off and then he's like, why are we finishing at noon? He's like, Bex, we should carry on. Ask them if we can stay longer. And then says, I want to do one every 6 months. And so, it was the proof of concept from a very, very skeptical audience. But the conversations that we had were the conversations that we weren't having and the conversations that we needed to have. And I think you're always going to be greeted with some of that skepticism. And once once people are there, they're like, yeah, this is worth it.
No, you first.
I was just going to say, I'm all for amazing experiential offsites, but you can also have an offsite that will be very meaningful for very little budget. So I think sometimes just getting creative, right? Maybe someone wants to host people at a barbecue at their house, or maybe people just want to go for a walk, or they want to go miniature golf, or the littlest things. I cannot read that at all. Is it 5 minutes? End. Okay, end. We'll end shortly. So I think to the proof of concept point, do something that doesn't cost a lot to begin with, right? And then they will see, right, not only how people feel, but I think then you can look at the productivity of the business. Like, how is the team operating? How efficient? How are we moving stuff through in terms of throughput of the business and projects? But it doesn't always have to cost money. Hey, I like to spend the money too, but I think, start small, show that it really is worth it, and then they'll have even better budgets. Maybe I'm gonna end on one quick question, because they talked about ice cream. I feel like Donald is known for this question now, and so I feel like I have to ask it since I haven't been in a session where anyone answered it. And I know I'm supposed to wrap, but really quickly, if your company were an ice cream flavor, what would it be called? And what's the unique ingredient that makes it stand out? That's a really complicated question. I don't even think I have the answer.
I love ice cream. I think ice cream is one of the greatest things ever created on the planet. If you ever want to get on my calendar, even if you're trying to sell into me like an offsite, just say we're going to grab ice cream. I promise you I'll make time for you. I would say Jenny's cinnamon skillet swirl. It's probably what Warner Brothers is right now. So we take some of the most traditional things, classic things that you like, and then we're trying to figure out how can we recreate them in order for you to walk away with something that tastes really well. So I would say that's our ice cream. How about you, Bex?
Wow. Unicorn flavor ice cream. Have you had that? It's really good. It's really good. And it's got these little sparkles in it. And that would be the people, because our people are what makes the magic happen.
I was going to say rainbow sherbet, which is, we ultimately are a community. I think both our company, right, and what we do is serve the community. And so I love the collection and how all of the flavors together kind of create beauty and magic. So with that, thank you so much. It went by so fast.
Thank you.
Thank you.